All right, guys, AP Gov Review 3. We're going to get into federalism today. We're going to knock out all this federalism stuff. First up, 3 laws I really want you to know in regards to federalism. Americans with Disabilities Act, the Clean Air Act, and then No Child Left Behind Act, 2002. Americans with Disabilities Act is a great example of an unfunded mandate where the states are being told by the federal government in order to comply with this law, you have got to meet these certain criteria. States bear the burden of the costs. So, whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act says public buildings must have wheelchair ramps and elevators for those with disabilities, the states are going to have to pay for that in order to be able to say they're complying with that federal law. So the states bear the burden. You're seeing that, one of the big concepts in AP government is the relationship between the federal government and the states. In this instance with Americans with Disabilities Act, you're seeing the federal government has that power. Block grants is money given to the states, right? Fiscal federalism, money given to the states for a broadly designed purpose. Homeland Security is a good example of a block grant, right? Gives the states power, right? If you're talking that balance of power shift, right, you're seeing some power shift to the states. They're given money by the federal government. They have a broadly designed purpose with that money, but they have some leeway in how they spend it, how they meet that federal goal, whatever that is. Another example would be a community development block grant, right? We want to get low-income people working. You decide how you're going to do that, all right? You come up with the plan. Here's the money to do it. Broad discretion in how the money's spent. Students mess up when they write about block grants. They say states can do whatever they want with the money. That's not accurate. It's a broadly defined purpose. Categorical grants, if you're considering that relationship between the federal government and the states, we're seeing the federal government exert power over the states again, right? So categorical grants, here's your money to repair your highways. It's a specific purpose. In order to get that money, you have to do exactly what the federal government says you have to do with it. Okay, the Clean Air Act, this basically is why we get emissions inspections for our car. Our cars have to meet certain requirement in regards to how much we're emitting into the atmosphere. Basically, again, another unfunded mandate from the federal government. States have to comply with this, so we bear the burden of that. And really, that kind of falls on us, the people of the state, because we go pay the $18 or whatever it is to go get the emission inspection, and then that's done by the state. The state is going to have to bear some of the administration costs in actually carrying out this law. But again, another good example of an unfunded mandate where we have to meet these clean air requirements. The states do. All right, so you're seeing federal government exert power over the state. Concurrent powers. These are powers shared between the federal government and state governments. All governments in the United States, they can borrow, they can tax, and they can create courts. So whether that's federal or state, right, they can tax, they can borrow, they can create courts. Cooperative federalism, also known as marble cake federalism. This is the sharing of responsibility of governing between the federal government and the states. Post-Great Depression, you start to see the blending of responsibility of governing between the federal government and the states. Devolution. This was Republicans really started to kind of push for this in the 1980s under Reagan, where it started to return the responsibility of governing back to the states. Welfare reform is a good example of that, right? So the federal government gives the states money for welfare, and then the states decide how they get people from not working to working. It puts the responsibility back on the states. So block grants are really an example of devolution. It's returning the responsibility of governing back to the states. Dual federalism, that is when the federal government and states are operating within their own spheres in regards to governing. Pre-Great Depression, when governments did a lot less, when we expected much less from the government. Federal government did its basically Article 1, Section 8 stuff. State governments did their reserve powers. There was not a lot of blending of responsibility of governing between the two. Okay, fiscal federalism. Fiscal federalism is just referring to the block grants and categorical grants. Fiscal referring to money, so this is just kind of a big umbrella term. Block grants and categorical grants fall under this umbrella of fiscal federalism. Mandates, we've already been through the mandates. Americans with Disabilities Act is a great example. Clean Air Act as well is a good example. All right. And I think it's really important to know those laws because those could be that second piece of evidence in those argumentation essays. Okay, No Child Left Behind Act. We never really got into this in class. I think I talked about it a little bit, but we didn't really go through the formal process of taking notes on it. I'm going to explain it now. Maybe you could see an argumentation essay where it says something like, should education fall under federal responsibility or state responsibility? Make an argument. Well, being that education's a reserved power, you'd probably want to go with the states on that. But if you went with the federal government, you could talk about the No Child Left Behind Act. This was one of the most sweeping changes in federal education law. It really caused a lot of tension between the states and the national government. It was passed under George W. Bush in 2002, and he got bipartisan support for this. This was championed by both Republicans and Democrats. There were some mandates as a part of it. So highly qualified teachers in the core subjects in every classroom for every state. So states had to make sure they were hiring highly qualified teachers. Let's put a little bit of burden on the states because to be highly qualified, you have to have a education degree from a college, an accredited college, and you've got to pass a test in that subject area. So for me to be able to teach economics and government, I've had to pass state-administered economics and political science tests. Okay, that's part of the No Child Left Behind Act. It put a much greater emphasis on testing. That's why we have EOCs. EOCs are a legacy of the No Child Left Behind Act. It's not around anymore. It went away in 2015. All right, so it was only around for 13 years. But one of the legacies still kind of around because of No Child Left Behind is all this emphasis on tests. States had to show what was called annual yearly progress from year to year. Otherwise, they could be sanctioned. They could lose money, all right? Now, only 8% of education funds really come from the federal government. So part of the reason this was unpopular was you had all these mandates in regards to like students have to perform better and teachers have to be highly qualified. Yet Congress is only footing 8% of the bill when it comes to education. It ended up going away in 2015. There was a new law passed in 2015 under Obama. It was called Every Student Succeeds Act, and it gave states more power and discretion in regards to the testing, and because of it as well, that's why Georgia was able to get rid of the economics EOC as well as a few of the others. All right. So, the No Child Left Behind Act, it's a good example of the federal government exerting power over the states. Education is really a reserve power. There's nothing in Article 1, Section 8 that kind of suggests the federal government can really encroach on education. The federal government is able to do that, though, right? Because the federal government does provide money to the states, so they start telling states how they want this money spent. But again, it's another good example of you see the federal government exerting power over the states. Privileges and Immunities Clause, highly doubt it shows up. Some years I've mentioned it, some years I haven't. I've never seen it show up on a test. I've never had a student mention to me that they saw it on a test. Privileges and Immunities Clause is just simply the fact that states have to recognize the privileges and immunities of citizens of other states. Okay, so it literally says citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. This prevents Alabama from, say, we're in our car driving from Atlanta to go to Birmingham. Right. So you don't have to get a Alabama driver's license in order to then drive in Alabama. Alabama's recognizing the privileges and immunities from Georgia. They're recognizing your Georgia driver's license. Not a big deal. Falls under federalism. There you go. Okay. 10th Amendment, really important. It creates federalism. It says those powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people respectively. So, those powers not given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8 are reserved to the states. Things like your big ones, education, public safety and health. Look at all the stuff going on right now with COVID-19, right? You're seeing it's a lot of the governors exerting their power. Right? So Kemp has said, we're going to open tomorrow, even though Trump has come out and said that's probably not a good idea. Kemp can still do that because of the 10th Amendment. Education, public safety and health, policing, and then elections. States run their own elections. Voter eligibility as well. These are big reserved powers. Okay, unitary government. A unitary government means it is just one central government. All right, so in the UK, they have a unitary government. They don't have the regional governments like we do in the United States. It's the opposite of federalism. You just have one central government. Therefore, policy in a country that has a unitary government is going to be unified. You're not going to see those disparities between spending on things like education like you do in the United States. All right, that's it for today. I hope you found this helpful.